Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final meeting of the Goal 9 Target Industries Approach Rulemaking Advisory Committee. I am still Lee McElvain, Economic Development Specialist with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Gordon and Casaria, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Gordon Howard. I'm the Community Services Division Manager. I've been working with Lee on this rulemaking.
Good morning, I'm Casaria Taylor. I'm the Senior Rules Coordinator for the agency.
And how about Commissioner Porter?
Hi, I'm in the dark now. I apologize. My name is Ellen Porter. I'm a Commissioner on the LCDC, and I'm the liaison for this rulemaking.
Thanks, Commissioner. Before we do another quick round of reintroductions today, we'll be resharing information about meeting accommodations to make this meeting more accessible for all participants, even those who might be watching the meeting in a recorded version afterwards. I'll be reading and describing each slide so that the content is clear for everyone. So this slide is titled Welcome Back, Accessibility Accommodations for RAC members who are blind or visually impaired. It contains 6 bullet points describing strategies, participant etiquette, and techniques we'll be using during the meeting. So I'll now read those bullet points. We ask that all participants state your name every time before you make a comment, even if it is mid-discussion. Slides will be read or described completely before any additional context or discussion is provided by presenters. Meeting participants are requested to remain on mute unless they are speaking. Clear audio is especially important for members of this committee. Chat will not be enabled during the meeting. Participants may send a direct message to DLCD staff. Please do not use Zoom reactions in response to polling types of inquiries from staff. We'll request a verbal response instead. And please raise your hand to participate in the discussion, and facilitators will recognize people to speak. If you can't locate your raise hand button, you can raise your actual hand, and Casaria can help us take note of that. Thank you. So it's been a couple of months since we last saw each other, so I think just to get reacquainted with our group, please reintroduce yourself. This slide is titled Introductions, and it contains 3 bullet points, and it asks that all committee members please share your name, the organization you're affiliated with, or the interest that you represent to this rulemaking. And for our October icebreaker, I would love if you shared your best Halloween costume, and this can be an idea that you have or an actual costume that you have worn in the past. And I guess I can get started. So Lee McElvain, I work with DLCD and I'm leading this rulemaking. And my Halloween costume that I've been thinking about putting together for many, many years, but have never actually done, is from the movie Aliens, when Ellen Ripley is wearing the loader so that she can toss the alien out of the airlock in the spaceship. And I think that I could do a really good job of putting this together in cardboard if I put the time into it. Why don't we popcorn around since we have fewer participants this time, and I'll go to Ted.
Good morning, Ted Reed with Metro's Planning, Development, and Research Department. Best costume was a very long time ago, probably 20 years ago. I made a costume for myself that was a giant squid, and it involved the insulation, foam insulation that goes around pipes that was for the tentacles, and had rubber bath mat suction cups that were in strips along there. So that was a great success, and I haven't tried to create a costume since.
Sounds great. Ted, if you want to indicate the next person to go, that'd be great.
Sure. How about Larry?
Larry Holzgang. I'm a regional development officer with Business Oregon. And last year I put together a Day of the Dead costume that is like what James Bond wore in the movie. And Jacqueline?
Good morning, Jacqueline Disney, Community and Economic Development Director with the Oregon Cascades West Council of Governments. Best Halloween costume was probably I hit the easy button that year, and I got a scepter and a tiara, and it was a beauty queen, and it said misdiagnosis. And so at the time I was working for social services, so it was apropos for all of those who were suffering from a misdiagnosis. I'll pass this to Allie.
Hey there, Allie Camp, City of Springfield's Economic Development Manager. One year I went as a snail and I built a shell out of paper mache. I will pass it to Bill.
Sorry, didn't know my settings. Bill Reed, Finance Director, City of North Plains. Best Halloween costume. I think I dressed up as a robot in kindergarten with tinfoil homemade cardboard box stuff, so that was fun. Let me pass it to, and if you've already gone, forgive me. So Todd Borkowitz with Washington County.
Thank you. So Todd Borkowitz, Senior Planner with Washington County. I'm replacing Matt Craig, who's no longer with the county on this committee. A favorite Halloween costume, foosball player, basically a soccer player with the big old pole sticking out. It was a great costume until I realized I had to get through doorways with it, and that was not as easy. So I will pass this on to Gil Kelly.
Thanks, Todd. Gil Kelly, and I'm no longer a public sector professional. I do independent consulting on planning and economic development issues. I guess I should say today, I sit on the board of 1,000 Friends of Oregon, and that's the group that I'm representing officially in this meeting, in these proceedings today. I guess in terms of Halloween costume, the one that seemed to get the most traction was during my civic service days, or civil service days. I put on a sport jacket, a black turtleneck, and then wrapped my face or my head completely with white gauze, put on dark glasses, and then a little name tag on the vest saying "Invisible Bureaucrat," and that seemed to spark people's interest.
Let's see. Is there anybody who has not had an opportunity to go yet? Nellie, I don't think you have.
Anthony Reeder, I think.
Okay. Let's go to Nellie first and then Anthony.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Lee. Nellie McAdams with Farmland First. And I've been Drew Barrymore in the Firestarter before. And then this year, my family's going to be the Flintstones, with my baby being Bam Bam and my 2.5-year-old being a pterodactyl.
All right. Well, I think there's something to be said for peaking early. And as a young person, I had a very generous and thoughtful mother that made me a pink Care Bear bodysuit and head. And I was searching around, and you can let's see if I can get it to not be. Well, can't really get it to see, but anyways.
Oh, I see it.
I found it on my phone, and so yes, me as a pink Care Bear, and my sister is a clown.
Thank you for broadcasting that to our YouTube audience.
Yeah, no, I thought that maybe the viewing public, in addition to their deep interest in targeted industries, would want to know what I looked like as a child. Was anybody left who has not yet gone?
I think we have not heard from DLCD staff and Commissioner Porter, so put you on the spot.
Well, I'll go first. The either best or worst costume I ever had, I cannot divulge in this location, in this setting, so I'll leave it at that.
Now I really want to know. Casaria Taylor, Senior Roles Coordinator. The best costume was probably last year. We dressed up as steampunk characters. Commissioner Porter.
Bringing up the tail end. I guess my My best Halloween costume was a couple of years ago. I dressed up as Will Ferrell as more cowbell, and my husband dressed up as Christopher Walken in that skit. So I actually glued fur to my chest for that one. That one was fun.
That's great. Well, I'm very impressed with everyone's creativity, and I hope you have a fun Halloween season this year. Let us move on to the agenda. So this slide displays the agenda for our meeting, and I'll now read it. We just completed introductions. After this, I'm going to provide just a very quick update on the rulemaking process and where we're at. And then the remainder of the meeting will just be devoted to kind of open-ended questions and discussion. We're not planning on introducing any rule changes that need to be reviewed by the committee today. So it's possible that it will be quite short and we can give you back a couple of hours of your morning. But there are some things that we would like to hear from committee members about. So I'm going to move on and we can get to that part. So this slide is titled Rulemaking Process Update. It provides an overview of the steps that this rulemaking has gone through since the Rulemaking Advisory Committee last met, I think at the beginning of July. So since then, the department filed rulemaking notice with the Secretary of State on August 15th. After having that accepted, DLCD staff held a public webinar on September 13th, which we also broadcast and recorded to YouTube. So if anybody is interested in watching that, you can go to DLCD's channel and check it out. Our first commission hearing on the proposed rules took place on September 27th, so just about 2 weeks ago now. And we are currently in the middle of the public comment period for this rulemaking. And the department will be accepting public comment on the draft rules through October 16th at 11:55 p.m., which I know is an odd time to cut off the comment period, but that's just what it is. And then finally, the adoption hearing for this proposed rule is scheduled for December 5th and 6th. So that's the time that the commission will consider and deliberate whether to make the proposed rules a permanent part of Oregon Administrative Rule. So this slide is titled Rulemaking Timeline. It's a visual aid showing the process of planning a rulemaking all the way through adoption by the commission. And I'm just sharing this so that the committee has a sense of where we're at in time currently with this effort. So since we last met, DLCD asked the Department of Justice to review the work of this committee and draft rule. And we published the rule for public comment and sent out all of the required public rulemaking notices. And the commission received its first briefing, as I mentioned, in September. And that was the only public hearing scheduled for this rule. So that was an opportunity for members of the public or members of this committee to provide testimony in person. No one signed up to provide any testimony during that meeting. But we did receive one written comment in favor of the rule from a member of this committee. So that was nice to have a little bit of public feedback. So we're now in the final week or so of this public comment period, and this is where members of the RAC or general public may submit comments to LCDC. But at this point, based on direction from the commission, we're unlikely to change the proposed language because the hearing that was held in late September, we heard general support from the public and from the commission at that time. So with any luck, the commission will hear and adopt our recommended amendments in December. Are there any questions about where we are on the timeline? You can just pipe up and yeah, please go ahead, Todd.
So I don't have a question about the timeline, but I was just wondering if anybody submitted any testimony during the public comment period after the hearing happened?
We have received one comment after the commission meeting, and so we have a grand total of 2 comments received on this rulemaking right now. And that comment will be included in the December packet to our commission for the rulemaking. And it's possible that folks can still send in comments after the October 16th deadline, but these are not comments that will be included in the information that is submitted to our commission at that time. And so if you would like for the commission to hear your perspective on this rulemaking, it's really important that you get comments into us before that October 16th deadline. Nellie, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lee. I was wondering, is it possible for us to see those comments, or were those in the packet? I'm sorry if I missed them. The ones that have already been submitted.
The first comment that we received was prior to the deadline to make it into the packet for the September meeting. And actually, Casaria, if you don't mind, could you hunt down the link for where Beth's comment is on the commission meeting page and pop it in the chat?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you very much. And then I'm happy to share the second comment that we received as well, Nellie. But it hasn't been published anywhere yet.
Thanks, Lee.
Sure. Other questions on timeline or public input received at this point? All right. So our prior meetings have been quite structured in terms of the feedback that the department was seeking on the proposed rule language. And I have sent out that rule language to the committee, I think in August, and then you received it again in your packet today. And since we're not soliciting feedback on the proposed language at this point, I'm opting not to review the rule again during this meeting. But what the department is interested in hearing from you as economic development and planning professionals is information on how we can support communities with this new rule. So this slide is titled Draft Rule Discussion. It has 5 bullet points. They state that open feedback is welcome and suggest a few question prompts. So that includes, how can DLCD support communities to understand this rule? How can DLCD support communities to use this rule? And what resources will help communities plan for target industries in the future? And you are, of course, welcome to respond to unprompted questions as well. But this is a pretty open discussion. Nellie, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lee. Nellie with Farmland First. I think one of my concerns about the application of the rule is that it still seems to apply city by city rather than regionally. And often, if there is a large opportunity that's land extensive, it's not going to be citing itself at multiple cities in one region. It would just choose one. My fear remains that this approach will be used by multiple cities in one region for an industry that would only locate in one of those areas. And then we have EGB expansions that kind of beg to be filled potentially with other things. So that's, I'm just laying that fear out there. And in my mind, I would love to see DLCD as a statewide agency engaging in regional planning to ensure that whatever economic development happens, we're conserving land and only using what we absolutely need.
Thank you for the comment, Nellie. I can appreciate that a regional approach is important when we're considering this sort of thing. Gil?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. I first of all just want to say thank you for doing a good job in terms of tracking the conversation so far and integrating a lot of that conversation into revised rule. I think in doing so, you've clarified some of the less clear points from the original and added in some necessary protections. I just want to sort of go on record again, as I've said in previous meetings, and I'll make this point to the commission for their December meeting. I'll try to submit these comments by next week's deadline. I feel in some ways we are formalizing what should be a very exceptional process here. That is to say, not the norm. And the more and more we sort of do a good job of clarifying, the more it seems like this ought to be just a normal process, when I think it should be a highly exceptional process to the ordinary process for economic opportunity analysis, sometimes resulting in a request for urban growth boundary expansions. This is a very open-ended aspirational kind of process saying, the individual city, me too, I want to be the biggest thing coming down the pike in the future. And I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but I just want to do it. And that to me misses some of the critical trade-off discussion that is embodied in the state planning laws around use of land, around use of infrastructure funds, which are precious, even if those are local. It misses the trade-offs around commute times and access to jobs and around equity considerations. So where we built some protections in if the land isn't used according to those aspirations, to me, there are several considerations missing that really underline how exceptional this ought to be. And in my mind, that ought to be for immediately foreseeable opportunities that wouldn't be developed out of the normal economic opportunity analysis. And that those ought to be fairly specific. And I know there's debate about what level of NAICS code should be used here. And it ought to be accompanied by a very specific concept plan, infrastructure financing plan, all of those things, rather than just kind of a open a wish and we'll figure the rest out later. And that in combination with some pretty rigid clawback, if this doesn't work, what happens? Does it actually come back out of the UGB even after certain levels of local investment? Does it just default to, data centers and warehousing, and because we couldn't fulfill our dreams? So I think more rigor needs to be applied at a conceptual level first. We've sort of bought into the concept from the beginning here that this is somehow needed and bona fide, and it may be needed in exceptional cases for exceptional opportunities, but to me the rule does not come across that way, read that way. So I just want to make those comments today so that I'm again clear with this committee and my fellows who I really appreciate on this committee, and also with the LCD. And I'm glad to see that Commissioner Porter's signed in here, because I think the irony is we're sort of, by making it a more clear process, we have sort of opened the door to formalizing its use in situations that I think were not really the original intent. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Gil.
And by the way, I'm a big believer in economic development. I do that for a lot of my career, but I think this is really not a process that will either deliver it or that keeps it in the larger civic construct around appropriate land use. Thanks.
Ted, you're up. Thank
you. Ted Reed, Metro Regional Planning. I think consistent with what Gil was just mentioning, the draft rules are responsive to an issue that we see, that we can't forecast every individual opportunity that is out there, but there need to be some bounds to how much job growth in specific sectors is reasonably likely. So I think our cities and counties, or cities, I guess, are going to need some help navigating what it means to be reasonably likely, and lending some structure to how they conduct that analysis, both in terms of the scale of employment and also defining what their planning area is. I see that as an issue in our region.
Nellie, you still have a hand up. I'm gonna assume it's old hand and go to Larry.
I just want to say that I appreciate, Gil, your comments, and I agree with your comments. I do think that for the most part, it has to be short-term opportunities that would use this particular rule. I've had that experience in my region where 30 years ago, the city of Clinton Falls used some money from Business Oregon to create a high-tech industrial park. What we have is a modular home manufacturer. We had aqua glass building tubs and spas and that type of use, because it turned out that it was right next to the airport, and high tech doesn't like the vibration from planes or trains, either one. And the city had missed that nuance when they built out the site. So um, I I do see this as being a really good rule that can dovetail with some efforts that Business Oregon has in the works. We are going to be in this legislative session asking for some funding to help back up the regionally significant industrial site program. We are hoping to have some patient capital funds that we can use to build out infrastructure to sites. But again, from Business Oregon standpoint, we do want to see that money used wisely. And so, when we use it in conjunction with this rule, I think it has to be a, relatively near-term opportunity to make it successful.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, thank you for your comment, Larry. I am curious if we can get some feedback from local governments represented on the call about what sorts of resources might be required to help your communities understand how to use this rule properly and for better economic outcomes where you live.
Hi there, it's Anthony from City of Hillsborough. So I couldn't quite, for some reason, find the raise hand button on Zoom. So I hope nobody minds if I just jump in. One thing that I think would be really helpful, particularly in light of the requirement to kind of constrain or lock properties that are brought in through the targeted industries to the industries for which they're targeted, would be some guidance about different approaches to do that. There are jurisdictions that have pretty robust land use and zoning programs, and then there's places that maybe don't have as much in-house technical knowledge about how to either create a new zone or create an overlay and what that looks like and how to integrate it in. And I think that's a really important part of the proposed rules. And I'd really like to see some support for governments in terms of how to implement that without going and asking them to maybe hire a consultant or have a whole logistical resource burden of trying to figure it out from whole cloth on their own.
Thanks, Anthony. That's a great suggestion. I do very much like the idea of coming up with some resources for how a city could effectively protect sites when they use this approach. Jacqueline, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, we work with a lot of smaller cities and smaller communities here that have really limited staff capacity. So implementing these kinds of changes, knowing how this kind of change is going to impact their current planning process, it could be costly to try to dissect what the impacts are of the rule change. So any kind of guiding documents, short form guiding documents that help us understand this may be what we're doing now, this is common practices now, how do we apply this change, or what kind of impacts do we expect from these change? So that way there's some guidance and instructions just in real easy terms for a lot of our communities to understand and digest.
That's helpful feedback. And I also just want to say it was very nice meeting you in person at PDX a couple of weeks ago.
I know it was a quick high five, but I wish I could have stopped and talked a little bit more. Visiting PDX was a really exciting trip to see some of the changes in that facility.
Yeah, it certainly was. Allie, please go ahead.
Along with what Jacqueline just mentioned about the cost implications, the time implications for small communities too. A lot of these changes will add time or process to what needs to happen before a decision gets made. And knowing that way before they need to allows them to plan for it instead of them needing to catch up or start already being behind in a process.
It's a very good point. Thanks. Gil? You're muted, Gil.
Sorry. Yeah, just listening to those now speaking on behalf of smaller communities, it may make some sense, it isn't embedded now, to have some steps or tiers, maybe 2 tiers, with regard to size of city and size of expansion, if that's what this is leading up to, an urban growth boundary expansion. Not that the intent should be less clear and more fuzzy or loose, but maybe the burden is less in some respects for small expansions of small communities that don't have adequate industrial land. I think they could probably justify that through the normal process, but to the extent that it's related to an immediate, or I've forgotten Larry's words exactly, but near term real opportunity, perhaps there's a way that can be accommodated. I think what we're all reacting to is the North Plains, which was, tripling the size of their on a look and a promise. So I think that could be differentiated from some of the smaller cities doing very modest expansions for a real opportunity. And so to me, the rule is a one size fits all and doesn't really look at that question very carefully.
Thanks for the comment, Gil. Bill, do you want to respond before I call in Nellie?
I guess I'm not hearing, first off, I'm not hearing a lot of comments about how small cities are supported by this. It's a lot of criticism about the rule that we've landed on. I guess what I would say is small cities with their own urban growth boundaries, a Goal 9 document and its employment land need identified, adopted, and once finally acknowledged by DLCD, the city doesn't even have to expand its urban growth boundary to include much of anything of that until it's ready or wants or decides to move forward with a UGB expansion. And so what I'm saying is I'm hearing a lot of confusion over annexation issues and use and infrastructure for land that's annexed versus just drawing the UGB line for an employment use, including a specific industry or user. And I think there's confusion that's been throughout this process regarding planning a site with a property owner and annexing it of a certain size for a specific industry and infrastructure to meet it, versus just drawing an urban growth boundary based on employment land need of some amount, maybe not even all that's been adopted and planned for the city, for a 20-year land need. And so I just, and it concerns me that the confusion about those two different things seems to permeate some of the concerns about this rule. This is just for smaller cities putting a line on a map and even beginning to plan out how to do this, and not all of which all that land is going to be annexed and developed over a 20-year period. I mean, the city of Hillsborough, right in the middle of it, along Brookwood Parkway, still has islands of property owners who still refuse to annex after far more than 20 years. And so it just strikes me as some confusion here is counterproductive over what a small city UGB process is. I guess the second thing is I appreciate all the concern about the size of North Plains' planned expansion and the process that's happened as a result of all that. And, that gets into politics. But the fact of the matter is, for the last 6 years since the end of voter-approved annexations, the city of North Plains has grown according to its 2002 urban growth boundary expansion to add workforce housing for largely the semiconductor industry in the Hillsborough area. And so North Plains was very specific about how it identified its land needs in order to be responsible fiscally for its own city, as well as not have people driving all over the place to just buy milk, literally. So I appreciate outside comments about North Plains and what it did or what it didn't do. But I think the important thing here, and I don't think DLCD would disagree, each individual community, particularly with its own urban growth boundary, has to figure out its own destiny and work with the state on that. And I appreciate outside concern about how big a small city is trying to grow. I don't know about other cities, but North Plains was pretty specific about what it was trying to do. And I would just add that we were right. ASML, the Dutch manufacturer of the machines that Intel is planning to use for its next wave of technology and manufacturing, as well as what sounds like will be a national tech hub for ultraviolet lithography manufacturing. ASML, the Dutch company that manufactures these very machines that are valued at between $300 and $500 million each, is currently working on a 210,000 square foot facility in the city of North Plains. That industry didn't exist before. There was no way for us to forecast employment for it. Zero precedent. So we had to do a targeted industries approach to figure out what types of industries would even be suitable for North Plains, given where we were. There's no employment forecast to base that growth on. And yet that industry and the Oregon semiconductor industry saw North Plains as a viable location. We did too with the targeted industries approach as we implemented it. So I want to defend that approach. I thank everybody for the contribution to the rules here. Yeah, I think North Plains is disappointed by how we're getting, portrayed and everything, but we were judicious exactly about what we did. I'd be happy to chat with anybody about it and provide the background documents that we used to do all this. But anyway, my hope is that cities using the new rules can identify new opportunities for their own economy that didn't exist before, because maybe they're nearby an industry cluster. They don't have it yet. There's no way for them to forecast employment growth. There is no way to really say, without some kind of targeted approach, there's no way for them to say it can be here and then it ends up arriving. That's a wonderful thing for small cities in Oregon who face a lot of challenges fiscally and economically. So, thank you for the path forward on rules that kind of formalize how cities can do it. But I think we have to remember these small cities with their own UGBs get to figure things out for themselves with the state and their community, and they should be allowed to do that. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing the perspective of North Plains, Bill. I appreciate it. Nellie, you've been very patient. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Lee. I think, my mind is still a little bit unclear about when one would use the traditional approach versus this approach, and then the steps and cost of each of those, because I think most small town UGB expansions could probably use the traditional approach and not have added costs. I do want to point out that ASML is located within North Plains' existing UGB, is my understanding. And then also to say that a UGB is more than a line. It sets a lot of expectations. It changes property values. It means that farmers who've been farming there, because they will continue to have farming there until development happens, annexation even, that they're that the future of that land, the property value, and the feasibility of it to stay in agriculture changes. So these are not just conceptual lines. These are lines that have long-term consequences, and that often lead inevitably towards annexation and the other future steps. And so just expanding UGB in the hopes or prospect of an expansion, or to have this land on hand and just in case, forecloses other opportunities and has opportunity costs for that land. I don't want to discount the impacts that it has in actuality.
Larry.
Yeah, and this time I'll try to build on what Bill was talking about a little bit. Where I see this being useful is if you have a small community or even a medium-sized community and you go through an economic opportunity analysis, it may not provide justification for, say, bringing in a very large lot, 200 acres, 500 acres, something like that, because your history and your 20-year land supply might not justify that kind of expansion of your UGB. However, if you have this particular process and a targeted industry that you know is going to need that particular size parcel, this would give a path to where you could pursue a specific parcel that's targeted towards an industry that you might be working with. And so it would be hopefully a easier path for bringing that type of a company into your city. That's kind of my thought.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, I would just elaborate that and respond a little bit to Nellie's question about, when this is used versus a more traditional approach. Um, we tend to see this type of economic opportunities analysis used when a city's economic development aspirations are deviating from what its employment growth forecast is looking like. And so I think it is important to have tools that allow cities to pursue an economic development vision that Oregon Employment Department is maybe not foreseeing. That seems to be very important to me. And to Larry's point, the other instance in which a community might use this is for a particularly land consumptive industrial use. Those are harder to justify, and so I think it's important to be able to demonstrate why that particular site or that quantity of land might be necessary for a particular industry. And one final thing is just to say that, of course, this is an optional approach. No community is required to use a target industries approach or, what we would consider to be a more traditional approach in the rule. There's still quite a bit of flexibility in how cities can approach this. Gil, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate Bill speaking up and Larry adding on. And I understand what they're speaking about is sort of the intentional long-term planning on the part of smaller jurisdictions outside of formal metro areas, potentially. I guess what this committee needs to think about, though, is the downside and the potential for misuse of this. And a lot of that will stem out of the real estate industry saying, I got a willing seller here, 200 acres. Why don't this Dutch company land here instead of in Hillsboro's already, designated industrial lands? Or forget Hillsboro example, pick any part of the state. And so to me, this point about including in the analysis requirement and how this is done by the local city and its consultants or with some state guidance, alternatives analysis at a regional scale, even if that's a small region in another part of the state, that's the missing link here, because otherwise this is just a real estate game. There are the bona fide city intentions on one side, and then there's the real estate shopping that goes on out there saying, hey, company X, I got a site for you, low land value, the city's ready to go, and it may or may not be the most suitable site for that, either from transportation infrastructure or a conflict with farming or whatever it happens to be. So somehow there's a missing step here that may not just be accommodated by LCDC's review of a local decision under this rule, because that step of regional analysis around alternatives and suitability is missing. And when you're talking about large sites and draws on commuters, draws on transportation infrastructure, changes in patterns from agriculture to urbanization, those are the big long-term implications and costs. And to have those not really adequately studied, I'm talking about the larger expansions here, it seems to me the missing link.
Commissioner Porter.
Thank you, Lee. Just a question back to Gil, if I may, on that last comment, just out of curiosity. So if folks were to do an alternatives analysis for some of the bigger siting opportunities, do you have an idea who would be the decision maker on the preferred alternative?
Well, that I think is where this procedure is not established yet, and I think that that's some combination of the locality and the DLCD doing some early step guidance or decision making, even if that requires a consult or decision by LCDC prior to the whole rest of the process going on, just around the original notion, the first step in this, because I don't think small cities have the resources internally to do an exhaustive analysis that would be required for a more thoughtful approach. And so they generally hire consultants, right? And so consultants are used to doing that kind of analysis, but then who makes the decision is correct. That's a critical question there. And I think there ought to be some pre-screening, pre-review, early step review by DLCD, again, for major expansions. I mean, Ted would do that at Metro, for example, just look at this kind of stuff within the urban growth boundary. Doing it outside is a whole nother, just a whole nother bundle of considerations around conflicts and drains on other public resources. So to me, there needs to be a step built in that's not contemplated in the current draft.
I certainly encourage all of the members of this committee, if you have concerns or you are supportive of the rule or would like to recommend small changes, at this stage, those concerns really need to be communicated to the commission before the public comment period closes. And once again, that deadline is October 16th at 11:55 p.m. So, please do communicate either your support or concerns about the rule by then. And I would absolutely welcome any additional feedback from this committee or organizations or interests that you represent on how it is that DLCD can help implement this effectively for the local governments that we serve. So I'd appreciate your thought on that question as well in the future.
Lee, if I could step in briefly here. The one comment I didn't hear from Nellie regarding the need for regional planning for economic development. That's not really the topic of this rulemaking, but there have been a couple of situations recently that have arisen that highlight this issue, and I think that this may be something that is the subject of some a future economic development effort, whether that involves rules or not, is how to best coordinate among several cities in a region regarding economic development and potential urban growth boundary expansions. The particular situation that comes to mind involves, in fact, which has come up by someone else, data centers, where there are several cities in Eastern Oregon that are looking at expansions for data centers, and there's been some question about coordination among those cities in a regional effort. And we're finding that there isn't much in our rules requiring that or governing that issue. So we may be looking at that issue in the future, definitely.
Thanks, Gordon. Nellie?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Gordon, for that, and to say that I would love to be kept informed on that and to participate in any way that makes sense.
Thank you. All right, well, hearing no other comments for the moment, I get back into a screen share. So next steps, this rule is moving toward adoption at our December commission hearing, unless we receive a raft of comments indicating that there might be more issues than have been anticipated before. So please do submit your comments to the commission if you have thoughts that you'd like to communicate about this proposed language by October 16th. And if you would like to listen in on that hearing on December 5th and 6th, you can watch on the department's YouTube streaming site. But once again, this is not a public hearing scheduled for December. Our only public hearing was scheduled for September, so you won't be able to provide testimony at this meeting, although you can have your comments included in the packet. And that is it for today. I do just really want to thank everyone again for your participation in this process. You have made this rule so much better than how it was initially conceived by staff who were thinking how to structure this. So we appreciate everything that you have added. And also just the, small community that we've built of good relationships between economic development and planning interests in this committee. And hopefully we'll see you in the future.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee.